Today, our guest, Dr. Jonah Yakel, is going to help break you free from that mental and physical prison that they said you'd be trapped inside forever. But there is a way out beyond those little pills and knives. The body holds the key. Nature is your medicine. You can overcome any supposed mental illness or chronic disease, and to show you how is the functional health practitioner, the host of the Brain Health Podcast, Dr. Jonah Yakel. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk to you because you are this treasure trove of information about everything brain health. We can get into things like inflammation and hormones and the ketogenic diet and basically everything. But first of all, I'd like to kind of paint the story of who you are and how you got into brain health. So I know there were a few sort of pivotal moments in your life. One that maybe led you into going into becoming a chiropractor. And then there's that fateful day in 2009. And then you made the Brain Health Podcast later on. So can you just go through some of those points and show us kind of how you got into brain health? And yeah,
absolutely. Well, Michael, first I want to thank you for having me on the Brain Shaman podcast. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. It's been a long journey. I've been in practice for over 15 years at this point, and if we were to go all the way back to the start, I actually got my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering. So I'm like way off the path of where I started, but I'd always had this inner calling more towards natural health and natural healing. And, I knew nothing about chiropractic growing up. I grew up in a very allopathic, family, just the traditional medical type of model. And, it just didn't really appeal to me, even though, both my brothers are medical doctors. It's just like the idea of, really having to rely heavily on pharmaceuticals. There's a time and a place, so don't get me wrong, but, that just never really called to me. And so, instead of committing all that time and money and needed, to go through medical school, I just decided, hey, I'll be an engineer. It's practical. It's easy. Won't take as long. They're always in demand. And I did that. And, the reality is I found myself really unhappy and disenfranchised. Like, how did I end up here? I'm like an engineer. I have no interest in this kind of stuff. I really in my mind, I'm like, well, I'll just pursue my hobby of natural healthcare on the side. Well, it's like, I had a full-time job. There wasn't a lot of a side there. And, not to mention like a wife and kids, I had a newborn son at the time. So it's like, there wasn't any additional time. And, somewhere, it was probably in 2003, I think, is when I quit engineering and we upped and moved and I went to chiropractic school. And really what it was about chiropractic was, I was reading through this book on natural healthcare, and it was kind of like an encyclopedia of all the different natural forms of healthcare. And, I was reading on chiropractic, and it specifically commented on, the chiropractic motto, the power that made the body heals the body. So that was appealing to me, this concept that innately our body knows how to heal and repair itself. Like the intelligence is already inside us. If we can create the space and the environment, our body can ultimately heal and recover. But then what really drew me in was this idea that, our central nervous system. So chiropractic is not about backs. It's not about fixing backs. It's not about back pain. Yes, it's great for that, but that was really never what it was about. It was always about supporting a healthy, functioning central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord, and really coming from the perspective that, if the connection between our brain and our body, like our brain is responsible for the function of every single cell, all like 100 trillion cells in our body. Like our brain is controlling and regulating all of that. So our hormones, our inflammation, some of the things that you had mentioned, right? Our digestion, our circulation, like all of this is being regulated through the nervous system. So if the nervous system is imbalanced and is unhealthy, oftentimes from years of chronic stressors, physically, mentally, emotionally, and toxic elements and whatnot. But if our nervous system is not healthy, it's going to interfere with our body's ability to heal and repair itself. So ultimately, my natural inclination towards natural healthcare and what I would have referred to as the mind body connection, that was something that was really intriguing to me back then. It was like this realization that our nervous system is our mind body connection. It quite literally connects our brain to our body. So it wasn't like this airy fairy like concept of, the mind has power over the body. It's like, no, our mind is literally, our brain is connected to our body. And when our nervous system is clear and balanced and healthy, our body is more capable of healing and repairing. So for me, that actually was just like an eye-opening moment where it's like, to this day, I'll have people be like, man, that's an interesting change. You went from being an electrical engineer to being a chiropractor. Like, those are completely opposite. And it's like, well, yes and no. I mean, when you consider the reality that our central nervous system is functioning off of electrical impulses, like going from doing the circuitry of machines and computers and whatnot to the circuitry of the human body actually turned out to be a fairly smooth transition. So that's really kind of how I got into what I was doing. And then, again, I think I had always really just loved taking in data in regards to nutrition and, diet and supplementation, like how all of these things can further optimize our body. And so I very quickly fell into practicing functional medicine, which, functional medicine is really kind of the essence of getting to the why we feel the way we feel. So as opposed to just diagnosing people and then treating their symptoms, a functional approach is about, well, why are you experiencing the symptoms that you're having? It's not, oh, hey, you have depression and therefore we're going to treat you for depression. It might be more along the lines of, okay, so you're experiencing depression. Well, hey, we know a lot of things can be at the root cause. Low functioning thyroid, for instance, is associated with depression. Imbalanced hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone can lead to imbalance. Low vitamin D levels. Dysfunctional blood sugar is actually a huge cause, a source of symptoms of depression. So, I mean, there can be all kinds of different, inflammation is associated with depression. So it's really about helping people, and I'm just using that as an example. So, I mean, there's, for any symptom, you can trace the roots back and see if we can't get to the why. And so the functional medicine element always kind of, helped just add an element of helping empower people to learn more about what it is that's not working for them. And then, of course, instead of treating symptoms, we're strengthening the system. So, we strengthen the digestive system, we strengthen the endocrine and the hormonal system, we strengthen circulation. So it just kind of segued into that where, I'm a chiropractor. I've practiced more traditional chiropractic, but, today I'm entirely doing functional medicine. And, all of this just creating the stage, for, some of the life events that then really kind of pushed me into brain health. And as you mentioned, that fateful day in 2009, that was a very, very severe car accident that I was in. I was actually just heading into the office when I had gotten T-boned. Someone had stolen a car and they essentially were trying to outrun the police. And they decided to, run a red light in an attempt to escape. And I was just, minding my own business, just driving through the intersection at green light when our destinies met in that moment. And as he drove straight into the side of my car, right into the driver's side door. They think he was doing 40 or 50 miles an hour. And my body was just absolutely, completely crushed. There's no, it was shattered upon impact. I had over 30 fractures. Almost all the ribs on my left-hand side were completely shattered. My pelvis was crushed. It was broken in 5 different places. I broke my sacrum. My left leg was broken. I've got a rod in my left leg to this day. And all of that was actually just the external stuff. So internally, it was even more dire what was going on. Both lungs had collapsed and were filling with blood. My diaphragm had been torn into multiple pieces, quite literally. My spleen exploded. I lost my spleen. My liver was torn open. So, I'm an absolute walking miracle. And, thankfully, I don't remember any of this. I never saw the car coming. All I remember is one minute I was driving through an intersection. The next, 3.5 weeks later, I wake up in an ICU room wondering what in the world happened to me. I think that in large part just because of all the support that I had, like all of the body work I was able to get, the chiropractic, I was already eating super clean. Like my recovery was truly miraculous. Like I mean, it was such a gift. I was out of the ICU within a week. I spent maybe 4 or 5 days in rehab before they sent me home. Um, I was off a walker within 4 to 6 weeks. I was off all pain meds within about 8 weeks. And believe it or not, I was actually back in the office adjusting people about 4 months after this accident that I really had no business surviving. And I thought that was the end of my story. It's like, what a crazy story. Like I'm like in natural health care. I completely go through this traumatic experience. My body's shattered, and I rise from the ashes, and I'm whole again, and I feel amazing, which was somewhat true. I mean, I still had quite a bit of pain in my body. And I guess you could almost say that in a way that kind of was a triggering moment in my life where at that point, having so much damage done to my body, I absolutely had to learn how to master inflammation. Because quite frankly, if I got inflamed, I don't care if it was from my diet, if it was from exercise, if it was from overdoing it, like any little thing, like, environmental toxins, anything that inflamed me could literally put me down for a day, if not a week. So it was like, I didn't have a whole lot of room to get inflamed. So I really had to master the techniques. And this is where functional medicine and chiropractic came in so handy. It's like, understanding eating a diet for inflammation, what supplements are best for optimizing inflammation. So I really had to learn how to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, it's like I thought that was my story. It's like, hey, this is my life story. Look at what I've been through. And look what I've recovered from. Like anything's possible. Like if my body can heal from that, like certainly someone else's body can heal and recover from something much lesser. And to me, that was like a testament really to the chiropractic motto, the power that made the body heals the body. Like our body is capable of healing and recovering from anything. But little did I know, maybe my biggest challenge was yet to come. About 3 or 4 years after that, now I'm at the top of my game here. I'm like running a large, wellness center in Kansas City area. So in Overland Park, Kansas, I'm doing functional medicine. We're doing chiropractic. I'm lecturing. I'm out teaching other doctors and chiropractors how to incorporate and practice functional medicine. Ironically, I was actually specializing in brain health and inflammation. And I started to experience some drop in my own cognitive function. And at first it started small. Like, I remember, I could easily, see, 40, 50, even sometimes 60 clients in a day in the office. And I would have no problem remembering everybody's name, remembering what they told me they were doing over the weekend. So it's like they'd come in and I'm like talking to them, hey, how the kids doing? How was your weekend adventure? Blah, and then suddenly people were coming in and I couldn't remember their name. Like, so I'd have to like get out the list, like, okay, who's coming in today? It's like, oh, okay, this is Stephanie, right? Whatever. So it's like little things like that started dropping. And as a presenting, like I'm up on weekends, teaching chiropractic techniques, teaching functional medicine. And it's like, I'm just starting to slip on my thoughts. And it didn't really, it was concerning just because I was used to being so sharp, but it's like suddenly like kind of losing this stuff. Now, eventually I had the courage to tell my wife, I'm like, hey, I think I'm like, like my brain's not operating like it used to. And, she's just like, oh no, it's, my brain's not operating like it used to either. Like I'm forgetting words and stuff like that. We're just getting older. I'm like, okay, fine. We're just getting older. But over time, my symptoms just kept getting worse and it started to move beyond the cognitive. So I started experiencing fairly significant fatigue. I was noticing hormonal changes. I was having increased symptoms of anxiety and even depression, which is not something I'd ever really felt like I could relate with before. And now it's just like, through the roof. It's like I'm having a hard time sleeping because of the anxiety, and then I'm depressed throughout the day. Eventually, I started developing like numbness and tingling in my hands and my feet. I mean, and the cognitive function just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. To the point where I was losing things, and I mean, I'm not just talking like I'd misplace things. Like we'd find weird stuff in weird places in the household, like the mayonnaise being in the cabinet, and it's kind of like at that point, my wife's like, "Yeah, this isn't right. Like something's going on with you." And then, of course, like so many people who go through this stuff, it's like so. Like I'm a functional medicine doctor. I'm like doing all the things I know to help boost my brain. It's not working. I'm meeting with some of the best functional doctors in the country, and following their protocols and their advice. And I just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. At that point, I'm starting to think, gosh, maybe I've got MS. I don't really know, like, what in the world is going on at this point. At some point, probably about 3 years after all of this started, I ended up getting an MRI on my brain that showed atrophic changes to 5 different areas of my brain. So essentially, here I am in my early 40s, and I'm in early stages of dementia. Like my brain is literally atrophying, and essentially due to a fairly significant amount of brain inflammation or neuroinflammation. Maybe we'll be talking about that a little bit today. But this was a huge wake up call. It's like I literally had the brain of a 70-year-old, and I had one doctor at one point tell me that he'd never seen so much damage in a brain, and that I'd be lucky if I knew my wife and kids within about 5 years or so. It was terrifying. It was a terrifying experience. Here I thought I had escaped disaster, survived this car accident, and here I am, maybe 5 years later, being told I'm lucky if I've got 5 more years before cognitively I'm just gone. So at that point, it just everything got ramped up into overdrive. Like everything I'd been doing, I had to double down on, and I had to I had to look at every potential threat, like anything that could be impacting my brain health. Ranging, as you mentioned, ketogenic diet. So ranging from diet to supplementation to exposure to toxins. Mold exposure turned out to be a big part of my healing and recovery. Past head injury. Certainly I had a head injury in that car accident, even if it was never really diagnosed. And so I spent the next 18 months I lived in a bubble, and I just doubled down. I cleaned up my environment. We got all the chemicals out of the house. We remediated. We got rid of any mold. I went through detoxification processes. And, lo and behold, it took a good year before I started noticing any improvement. But gosh, by about 18 months after this whole thing started, everything changed. My energy was back. The numbness and tingling in my hands and feet was gone. I was sleeping through the night. And most important, my brain was working again. So finally came the really fateful moment where I had to go in for an updated MRI to see. And it's like, did this really change? Is this all in my head? Am I really getting better? And, I was petrified, but thankfully, the follow-up MRI showed that all 5 areas, well, I should say this, 3 of the 5 areas had completely healed and recovered and were actually, in fact, better than average for my age. 2 of the other areas were still borderline. I'm sure if I were to run it again today, at this point, it's probably all resolved. It's been quite a while, but so that's why we are where we are. That's really what my mission is at this point: is helping people master their brain health, like working with people who have serious cognitive changes, people who either want to prevent, people who are interested in slowing down, reversing, believe it or not, actually even reversing symptoms of cognitive decline. Like bodies heal, brains heal. So that's how we got. And if you want to call that a nutshell, I don't know if that's the nutshell version, but that's my story. That's how we got here. And it's like if I can help one person save their brain and give the gift that I feel like I was given, then I've done more than I could possibly desire, really.
Right. And one might think that the reason you were experiencing all these negative symptoms like low energy, anxiety, fatigue, inflammation, all of these things, well, you might say, oh, well, you got in a car crash and you were surrounded by mold and all of these things. But it sounds like this is a problem that most people have. We have this, and it's all kind of the same thing. It sounds like low energy, inflammation, mental illness, or cognitive decline. These are all like different words, but it sounds like it's kind of explaining a single phenomenon with similar causes. So, what's causing this overall lack of energy, lack of mood, lack of vibrancy? What are some foods or behaviors or things we can do to feel better, basically?
And that is such a great question because what the current research is telling us about cognitive decline, for instance, and dementia is it's multifactorial. There is no one root cause. There's multiple root causes. And to date, it's becoming very clear that there are a few specific things that are clearly at a root cause. So we know that inflammation is a driver of cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's. It's a huge player. For some people, they actually have genetic predispositions to higher levels of inflammation, which, by the way, is really good to know because this is actually somewhat one of the easier things to address is managing the inflammation. And, to your point, like all these symptoms seem connected. Well, it's because they are. Like, we know that inflammation is at the root cause of nearly every physical disease process that we know of, right? So, like cardiovascular disease, for instance, we know inflammation is at the root cause. A lot of digestive disorders, IBS, Crohn's, colitis, those are all inflammatory diseases, arthritis, autoimmune conditions. Even now, as I'm saying, dementia and Alzheimer's, we now know are connected to inflammation. So it's not just our body, but our brain also that is being severely impacted by inflammation. So when the brain gets inflamed, well, as I mentioned earlier, it's like the brain controls everything. Like it's responsible for your hormone levels, for instance. So when the brain gets inflamed, well, it impacts thyroid function, it impacts adrenal function, it impacts the production of estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. So hormones can collapse and crash. Our brain and our gut are intimately related. So when the brain gets inflamed, it's going to impact gut function. We're more likely to have like heartburn, indigestion, bloating, constipation. Brain is regulating the body, so we can start developing more musculoskeletal pain, like joint pain, muscle achiness, and that's where people get like the fibromyalgia aspect of neuroinflammation. But we like to say like there's a lot of symptoms because again the brain impacts the immune system. Like we could go on and on. We spend all day talking about everything the brain is regulating. But the truth is that any symptom is possible. When the brain gets inflamed, any symptom is possible. But there's really four hallmark symptoms that we say, okay, these are the four hallmark signs of brain inflammation. So obviously cognitive changes. So brain fog, executive functioning, like loss of executive functioning or memory. So that's an indication of brain inflammation, which between you and me, Michael, is like, we throw around the word brain fog a lot, and I really think that it's a minimization of what's actually going on. If someone's got brain fog, their brain's inflamed. Like that's what's happening there. So if we were to replace brain fog with brain inflammation, it's like, we might take it a little bit more seriously. But so brain fog, symptom number one. Number two would be fatigue. Three is chronic pain, and four is anxiety and depression. And a lot of things can cause any one of those. But when someone shows up, they're experiencing all four of them. They've got brain fog, they're tired all the time, their body hurts, and they're depressed and anxious. There's a pretty good indicator that the brain's inflamed. So, that's one root cause. So inflammation, maybe the most important emerging root cause has to do with our metabolic state, our body's ability to burn fuels for the brain. And really this comes down to blood sugar. Last summer, I think it was, a study came out that said that 93% of Americans have unhealthy blood sugar and ultimately are dealing with insulin resistance, which is kind of like pre-diabetes. 93% of Americans are pre-diabetic, insulin resistant, which is a major driver of cognitive decline, and not to mention mental emotional disorders like depression and anxiety, and even things like bipolar, things like schizophrenia, like OCD are now being linked to these metabolic disorders. And when you consider that, again, 93 only 7% of Americans have healthy blood sugar, and the real crime here, Michael, might just be the fact that no doctors are testing for this. Like, this will not show up by the time your typical blood work shows blood sugar problems. You're like already well into being pre-diabetic. Like, it's been going on for decades. So, from a functional standpoint, it's like any doctor who's trying to get to root cause has to be doing more in-depth testing to find out, not just, yeah, are you diabetic? It's like, we want to find out years before that ever happens. So there's that factor. We know that low functioning hormones is another major player. So it's like low functioning thyroid level, or low levels of thyroid hormone, low levels of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, all contributors to cognitive decline and dementia. Those hormones are very neuroprotective. They actually help heal and protect our brain. And so when they drop off, we start speeding up like the cognitive decline. And, this is obviously one theory why women are more prone to cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's by a fairly significant margin. And the thought process here is that, when women go through menopause, like, they get a drop off in all those hormones. So there again, it's going to speed it up. Whereas, in many cases, men can have higher levels of testosterone late, into later years in life. Although we're seeing even that's changing at this point. We're seeing men with lower levels of testosterone at younger ages in general. But so there's the hormone components. We got inflammation, we got blood sugar, we've got hormones, and we've got the toxic elements of environmental toxins, heavy metals, mold exposure, Lyme disease, long COVID, all have been shown to cause brain inflammation and, potentially lead to, again, cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So those are like the really heavy hitters. It's like when people show up and they're like, hey, my brain's not working, that's those are the big players. It's like, we need to root out, like, which one of these is the biggest problem. Are you inflamed? Is it your blood sugar that's an issue? Are your hormones low? Are you having exposure to environmental toxins? Of course, circulation can be a factor, as can previous head injury. So there's a little bit more to it. But, that's really the goal with any kind of functional approach. It's not just, hey, I'm having these symptoms, what do I do? It's like, well, what's driving the symptoms? And then once is it inflammation? Is it blood sugar? Is it hormone? Once you know what's going on, well, then you can put together protocols, specifically like diet, for instance, to actually help support brain health.
It seems like in modern times, we often wait until something really serious happens, like we have Alzheimer's, or we have a heart attack or something, till we really start fixing things. In the meantime, we take medications or distract ourselves somehow or something. And I'm a little bit curious about this, just because, I'm only embodied in this one body, but for me, I feel really, really sensitive and almost picky about my mood when I get brain fog, which I get pretty quickly once I ingest processed foods or carbs or drink alcohol. I feel highly sensitive to the effects, the psychological and bodily effects that anything has on me. And I don't know if it's like that for everybody, and they're just covering it up, or they think that that's how it has to be, and that life isn't, that you're just getting older and you're stuck with that. But I've noticed that on the converse, when I consume, plants, certain vegetables, drink a lot of water, get sleep, get the sun, don't play on my phone too much, different things like this, I feel amazing. It's not just the food, it's the nature, it's a lot of different things. And I feel like almost like within 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes almost even quicker, consuming certain substances, I can physically feel the inflammation right up here. I can feel the fog, or the reverse. I feel like this head chakra or something, like I'm all like in this blissful state because I drank this cacao, or I This is not natto. It's this fermented food in Japan, and that's one thing I'm gonna miss if I ever do leave Japan. Is like, oh, this natto. It makes me feel great. It's packed full of vitamin K and all this bacteria and everything. And we don't need to get into the individual foods, but do you have any ideas on why why people are just accepting? I mean, they're not accepting it, but why are some people more sensitive to foods and substances, and others are not? And how can we increase our sensitivity? Because it sounds like the more sensitive and aware we are of the effects things are having on us, the quicker we'll realize, oh crap, I gotta change.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a good question. And, there's so many myths about healing and about our body and like these narratives that we're taught about how our body works. And I mean, to me, it's like kind of part of the grift. It's like our system is not designed to empower the individual. And it's like, I don't know how it became that, drugs and surgery was a conservative approach to health, but exercise and diet was a radical approach to health. It's like, how did that story get flip flopped? And and I think that this just goes into the narrative where most of us are raised with this collective understanding that we have no idea how our body works. And that, our body is a little bit like a car in the sense that, when it gets broken, we need to go to a doctor who is then going to fix it. Like, we don't recognize that our body is innately capable of healing and repairing itself. Like, it was designed to do this. So it's like this concept. It's like most people don't recognize that their diet is playing a huge role in the way that they're feeling, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. And that's because it's been trained out of us. Like, we have been taught that we don't have control over our health. So when we stop feeling good, we have to go find someone who can, give us some kind of medication ultimately to fix it. So, I mean, I think that that's kind of like one piece of the puzzle, this general belief that diet and exercise can't really make that big of a difference. I mean, we all know it's good for us, but we don't recognize it as the powerful resource it is. I mean, I see people get changes in their lab work, like cholesterol levels, blood sugar levels, inflammation levels, through in 1 month's time in dietary changes than 3 medications could possibly do. Like, diet is a drug. Like, it changes our body's chemistry. It is the fastest way to change health outcomes. But again, we don't believe that story. We just haven't been taught that story. It's like, it's like we have to look outside. So, you're talking about the sensitivities. It's like, as our body is a feedback system. Like, it's constantly telling us what works and what doesn't work. And that's how I really perceive a symptom. Like, if you have a symptom, whether it's fatigue, whether it's brain fog, whether it's your knee hurts, like, essentially this is your body's feedback. It's essentially saying, hey, something you're doing in your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, chemically, like what are you eating or drinking, right? Something you're doing in your life isn't working for you. So our body, it's like, if we can attune to that, if we can start listening to our body's, messages saying, hey, you need to evaluate, like, what something you're doing is not working. And you know what? I'm just going to share this crazy story because it's happened twice in the last week. So I think it's relevant for this podcast. But I've had 2 women who were dealing with very, very chronic illnesses, like incredibly chronic illness that they've been having for years. One woman had gone through evaluation for early onset Alzheimer's, like she was having so much cognitive change. And in both of these cases, through just divine intervention, maybe, their marriage completely collapsed and they recognized their husband was not who they thought their husband was. And they got out of those toxic relationships. In both of these cases, all their symptoms resolved. like almost overnight. I mean, it was unbelievable. And these are women that I'd been working with for quite a while, and we'd made huge progress, but it was like huge changes from something that, and you know, happens once. It's kind of like, well, that's interesting. Happened twice. And my point of the story is really that it's like our health is connected to so many different things that we don't look at. But so, you know, if we're having symptoms, that's our body's way of screaming, hey, something in your life, something you're doing is not working for us. Maybe it's physical. Maybe you're sitting at a desk all day. Maybe you're not exercising. Maybe you're over exercising. Maybe it's mental, emotional, right? Maybe it's stress levels. Maybe it's something you're thinking about or not thinking about, or maybe you're stuck in a toxic situation with a job or a relationship. And of course, maybe it's chemical in nature, right? It's what you're eating. Maybe it's what you're drinking. Maybe it's what you're not eating or drinking. So, you know, learning to listen to our body, you know, our body's going to tell us not only that we've got a problem, it's usually going to guide us at least into some introspection as to, well, what might be causing that problem. And so, you know, but again, what are we taught? We're taught, well, if I have a symptom, I go to the doctor, he gives me a medication. So we don't think about it. We don't make the correlation between, wow, when I eat this food, I feel better, or when I eat this food, I feel worse. Like, because it's not part of our narrative. We're taught that's not possible. And because we're taught it's not possible, we believe it's not possible. So we don't even look for it as a possibility until every once in a while, you know, it's like someone like yourself, Michael, who's like, you know, I don't know what triggered that awareness in you, but you started to become aware that something you were eating, like that things outside your world were impacting like your inner experience, like how well your brain functioned. And, you know, as far as the sensitivity goes, I think there's two factors at play. Like one, we know that when the body it gets damaged enough, we start to lose integrity of certain barriers or boundaries in our body. So that can be in our gut. We can develop a leaky gut syndrome. That can actually be in our blood-brain barrier. We can develop a leaky brain, believe it or not. And when those things happen, we do develop greater sensitivities to the things we eat, to chemicals in our environment, like where maybe before they didn't bother us. But now, because of the degree of damage that's occurred in our body, we start to become more and more sensitive. And I hear this all the time. People coming to me, it's like, well, I never used to have a problem with that food. And it's like, well, because your body was healthy enough and resilient enough to be able to take in that toxin and deal with it. At this point, it's been damaged to the degree where it can't manage that anymore. So we tend to develop these sensitivities more as we age. So that's one. But number two is an entirely different side of that coin, where I'll have people come into the office and maybe we'll put them on a 28-day cleanse or something. So we'll get them off these toxic foods, get them out of a toxic environment, get them on a really clean diet. You know, they'll witness their symptoms oftentimes resolving, they're feeling better, brain fog clearing, energy's up, mood is amazing, sleeping great at night. However, when they finish their cleanse, inevitably, you know, what do we all do when we finish a cleanse? What do you think the first thing is that most people do when they finish a cleanse, Michael?
You eat a bunch of junk or get drunk?
Yeah, we go right back to our old diet, right? So it's like, absolutely. It's like, all right, I completed 30 days of eating clean. I'm going to go eat a bag of chips now, you know, like celebrate. And immediately all their symptoms start coming back. It's like, boom, it starts, you know, hitting. And sometimes it hits harder than they noticed before. And this really has to do with the fact that, you know, once the system gets cleaned, it's almost like these toxins become more apparent. They're more almost offensive to the body. Whereas, you know, I liken it to a pond. So like if we're walking around with a body, you know, that's toxic, we're not going to notice if we're eating toxic food. It's just like if I had a muddy pond, no one's going to notice if you throw a handful of mud into that pond. It's just like, it's muddy. It was muddy before, it's muddy after. You know, same with the body. It's like, when it's toxic and we're eating toxins, it becomes very unclear how these foods can be impacting us. Like we always feel bad, and you know, eating it doesn't seem to make a difference. But when you get super clear, when you get clean, now these foods, it becomes much more aware how they're impacting us. So it's like throwing a bunch of mud into a clean pond. It's clear. It's like, yeah, you can see that now. So if you've got a clear system and you put toxins in it, you're going to be able to hear. It's not that you're actually more sensitive in the sense that your body can't handle it. It's more that you are more attuned to a clear state. And when your body gets altered from that, it's a lot more apparent. Like there's more contrast, right? So it's like, if your body's toxic and you put in toxins, might not notice. If your body's clear and you put in toxins, there's a big contrast. So it becomes very evident that certain things are not working for us.
Right. So it's more of an awareness or an interoception or consciousness or something. The word sensitivity has a sort of negative ring to it. So maybe we shouldn't even use that word, but it's more, is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I don't know that we use that word in a very positive way now that you say that, right? It's like, if someone's a very sensitive person, we don't really think of that as being a good quality, so to speak. And, the same thing, people come back and they're like, look, I started eating better and now I can't eat these bad things anymore. I think it's making me more sensitive than I was before. And again, that is like a little bit of that's one way to look at it. But really what's happening is it's an attunement. Like you're becoming more attuned to your body's needs. And because of that, you can make choices that are going to be more honoring to the body. It's actually a good thing. It's like we want our system to be able to tell us when something's not working, and we want to be able to hear it. So it's not that they suddenly became sensitive, to eating, chips or something, whereas they could eat it before and it didn't, upset their stomach, but now they're eating it, it's upsetting their stomach. Again, it's like they just weren't aware because the system had adapted to being toxic. So at this point, it's like, this is actually one of the great benefits of actually doing a cleanse, is not just that we actually cleanse out the toxins, but that we actually become more attuned. And it's like we're like this walking sensor where our body's going to say, hey, yeah, that food didn't work. Let's not eat that anymore. I mean, that's just simple evolution. Like that is our body telling us these foods don't work, don't eat them. Like we have that intelligence inside of us. We're just completely disconnected from it. And in fact, as we're having this conversation, it's the realization that not only are we disconnected, but we see it with suspicion. Like if we have that kind of sensitivity, well, it can't be a good thing. It must be bad, right? But it's like, no, that's exactly how we should be. That's how we're going to live. Exactly, right?
Life is supposed to be full of pain, and if you can't take it, it's your weakness. But like we have pain for a reason. Pain's a signal that something's going wrong. We got to take some kind of action. Yeah. And it also sounds like it's not just a food sensitivity. It's or awareness. It's about everything in our life. When we're surrounded by junk and when our pond is all polluted, whether it's like with those women you're talking about, maybe it's in their social life with their marriage, or with our culture we're living in, or our community, or it could be a lot of different ways. It's not just food, but whenever we're surrounded and covered in slime, we don't really notice a little bit more slime. But once you get clean, you take a shower, you do that 28-day cleanse that you put your clients on, you start to wake up. And maybe when we remove ourselves from a toxic environment, or create a less toxic environment in our own body or in our own mind or wherever, then we can solve not only these biological problems or whatever, and mental problems, but also social, financial, etc.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great point. And, I might even throw in one other, and I'm going to have you ask that question again, because I had this thought also. It's like, it doesn't just apply to food. Like in the case of mold, for instance, there's a concept called unmasking. So it's like if someone's living in a toxic home, like if the home is moldy, if they're, and they're having exposure and they can't figure out, like, is this what's causing my symptoms? One of the things you can do is you take them out of the home for a couple of weeks and get them into an environment where they're not being exposed. And then once they start feeling better, you stick them back in the environment. If all those symptoms come back, it's like, boom, bingo, you now know that the home, but they couldn't notice it while they were there. They were like swimming in it, so it's like, it just wasn't evident that was causing the symptoms to begin with. So it's not just food, like doing a cleanse. It's like, we can use this in a lot of different areas in our life, where it's like you remove the toxic element for long enough, for your body to kind of reset. And then when you re-expose it, your body is going to give you a very clear answer.
Yeah, and it's like when we travel, or when you live abroad, or you take some time away from work or anything like that, you start to realize, you start to learn things about your life, things you took for granted, things you assumed that you thought this is the way things are. And you mentioned how did I become um, more aware of the way food's affecting me. I don't think I really had this before I moved to Japan, and then I would be in Japan and I go back to the US. Not that Japan's like this clean environment, but it's a different environment than it is in the US. And so whenever I go back there, it's the food people are eating is the way people are eating, the quantity, the frequency, and a lot of other things too. The TV's always on, different things like that. And it becomes very starkly apparent. So it's not just the effects that the foods and things have on my body when I go back to the US, but it's also just walking down the street. And I'm not trying to judge people or saying I'm superior. I cry. I'm not happy sometimes, but uh, people don't look okay. People look sad. Even if they're smiling, they look sad. It looks like mental illness to me. It looks like it's everywhere. So I saw all that. And then, my brother got hit really hard from it, and he went homeless, and now I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want him to get mad, and, but yeah, he got thrown around, and basically he's in a hospital right now, and he might be there for the next 2 years. He's got bipolar disorder. Doesn't want me to say that because, it's not, he doesn't want to think it that way. And maybe he shouldn't. Maybe it's not bipolar disorder. Maybe it's inflammation, or it's something else that we're talking about, and it is curable. And he doesn't want to take these meds, and a lot of people don't want to take these meds, and there might be other ways out. And now my questions got all tangled up right now, and I don't know what my question is exactly. But one is like, I think one, I was saying because I think because I was away from that environment, not a clean environment, but I think a cleaner environment being in Japan brought that awareness to me. And then I guess the second point that I sort of stumbled into that I've been trying to avoid because I just don't want to hurt my family or hurt my brother. And I don't think he wants the spotlight shined on him, but he does need help. And it's not just him. I have a cousin he's handling it well. And he actually listens to this podcast too. And he has bipolar disorder. And he seems to be doing perfectly well, but I don't know. What can people with, you can take this any way you want, any direction, but the really important thing for me and for my family, I guess, is with things like bipolar disorder, what can people like that do aside from just taking their medication?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points that you made in there that maybe I'll try to speak to
Like
both of
100
them.
points.
Yeah, I think one, just talking about the differences in the culture between Japan and America, and obviously, there's a lot of really wonderful things about both cultures, and I'm just going to speak to the American culture right now. Like obviously, like there's a lot of benefit, and we really pride ourselves on the concept of sovereignty and freedom and things of that nature. But with that has come some negatives also, where we have created a highly, highly profitable system that keeps people sick is the truth. And it might, I'm not sitting here saying that it's intentional, but there is profit in it. It's like, the foods that are readily available and the foods that the government subsidizes, like, to keep them cheap, are all very unhealthy, like sugars and processed, grains and corns and soy, and like all these foods that are available for cheap are highly inflammatory, and they impact our brain function and therefore impact our mental emotional states. And so, and then you throw in the pharmaceutical part and the insurance part. It's like, the pharmaceuticals. And again, there's a time and a place for everything. So, I mean, there is no right or wrong in this situation, but we have to also be able to recognize that the pharmaceuticals, they profit from people not being well. Like their system is not designed to heal people. Their system is designed to treat the symptoms that are a result of basically the unhealthy lifestyle that is pushed upon us and provided to us, again, because it's cheap. Like, it's cheaper to eat junk than it is to eat clean. And I mean, that is a massive boundary or obstacle for people who are trying to get healthy. And it's like, we know that. Now, granted, in America, this impacts all classes, so it's not like it's just the lower income classes, but they definitely get hit harder because they don't have access to things that should be easy. It's like I should be able to eat a diet that is natural for me and is helps my body heal and repair, but it's not affordable. Like, this is what I can actually afford, and then that drives us into the healthcare system where we're reliant on drugs that we now need to be on for the rest of our life. So the system is actually working against us. It works against healthcare, and you could even throw in the fact that, like, there are chemicals in this country that are unmitigated, that are not even allowed in places like Japan and Europe. Because they're known toxins, and yet we use them, and they don't even need to be measured. It's like, look at glyphosate, so Roundup. They spray these on the weeds, on the crops, mostly because they've genetically modified the crops so that the crops can take on high levels of this chemical so that we can grow more crops, right? But that also means more chemicals on the crops because it doesn't impact the crop. So what happens is it's like, yeah, we're getting cheap food, but it's highly toxic. And these chemicals aren't even allowed in other countries, yet we can use them, as much as one. It's not even measured. So that, in that regard, it's like it puts people in this country in a really challenging place. It's like we are swimming upstream. We are going counterculture trying to get healthy. We are bombarded with commercials and everything just selling us cheap, addictive junk food that's going to make us sick. And then we turn to a healthcare system that's not going to get us better. Doctors aren't talking about changing your diet. You might. The best you're going to get when you go to a doctor is you need to lose some weight and change your diet and get some exercises. Like, they don't know what to do. Like, most doctors aren't healthy. So it's like they don't have any guidance on this. They just know, hey, well, you should change your diet. And if that doesn't work, then we'll put you on some medications. Well, guess what? It's not going to work because nobody knows how to do it properly. So it's like people go out and they try their hardest and, they do what they think might be healthy when it turns out isn't necessarily healthy. So they end up, and we just get stuck in this system. And we get devoured. We never have an opportunity to heal and recover. So, I think that is a real challenge that we're up against. It's like, there is more money in us being sick than there is in us being healthy. And I don't know if that's entirely true. Like, maybe we would actually all benefit and prosper more greatly if we were all healthy. Like, that makes sense. But the way the model is currently set up is certain people and companies and businesses profit greatly from people being sick. So, and those are the people in power. So that makes it really challenging. In regards to, so there's that, but then you also had talked about like changing gears a little bit, like, and I don't know, maybe you want to comment on that before I start talking about bipolar. Maybe you got something to add.
Yeah, no, keep going.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, there's that reality. I think that's what you're getting a taste of. Like, other countries are more protective of their of their people in it, as much, at least in that one regard. I can't speak like globally, but it's like, European countries, some Asian countries, is like they don't allow some of these known toxins into our diets. They're protecting the people that live there. Bipolar is interesting, and I think that this is probably maybe the most exciting new breakthrough that we're starting to understand in regard to mental emotional health. Is, sometime in the summer of 2022, a huge high quality umbrella review of essentially studies done based off what we call the serotonin theory, the idea that low serotonin levels is what's responsible for mental illness, especially things like depression. But it's associated with a lot of these different things like bipolar and whatnot. But so this giant review, and mind you, our entire approach to healthcare and treatment for the last 30 plus years has all been based off this serotonin theory. And this is where antidepressants come from. It is like, well, it's going to either increase serotonin levels. There's a couple of different ways that it can do that, but it's really all about increasing serotonin levels in the brain. Well, this umbrella review, what this review said is that it was based off of some early studies that were really quite faulty. They were poorly done. And so it really brought up the question, like, are we actually, like, is this really the root cause of, say, depression, is low serotonin? And I mean, it makes sense. The truth is antidepressants, while life-saving for many, it works for, it's ineffective for even more. I think they say about 30% of people will benefit from an antidepressant. The other 70%, it's not going to be effective. It's not necessarily going to work. So, and I mean, that leaves a lot of people really, really struggling with no answers. But it also, what it did is it allowed us to start becoming more open to the possibility that something else is at the root cause. And right now, I think that, at the forefront of all of this has to do with metabolic function and the energy, the fuel source that our brain uses for energy. Like we use two things for energy. We can use glucose for energy, which our brain relies on fairly heavily, which is sugar, coming from carbohydrates, or we can use fat for fuel, which is a ketone body, which ultimately comes from, burning fat for fuel. We release these ketone bodies that can be used. So an inefficient use of energy by the brain is the current theory that is driving most mental emotional disorders, and that they're all actually connected, that it's just a different symptom of a same root cause. So whether we're talking about depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD, that these can all be traced back to metabolic dysfunction. If you remember from earlier in our conversation, Michael, well, we know that 93% of Americans have metabolic issues. So, this could very much be why this is so widespread, why, more than half of Americans are estimated to experience severe depression at some point in their life, because it's a huge player. And so the research is now telling us is that by changing the fuel source, so as Americans, we rely on carbohydrates for fuel, like we are sugar addicts. 200 years ago, it's estimated that we consumed about 2 pounds of sugar or carbohydrates throughout the course of an entire year, whereas now the modern day American consumes about 170 pounds of sugar. So, I mean, that is a massive 2 pounds to 170. Like, we eat more carbohydrates and sugar in a week than our ancestors did in an entire year. It's like a miracle that we're actually still alive, that our body has been able to adapt to this. But it's not at all shocking that we're sick and that we're struggling physically, mentally, and emotionally. But so a lot of the current science is showing us that by reversing that, by changing the fuel source, by eliminating the carbohydrates, moving over to a fat-based diet, putting our body into a ketogenic state, is in fact having incredible results. Now, one, we already know it's highly anti-inflammatory to the brain and the nervous system, to the point that there are neurosurgeons in our country that require a ketogenic diet pre and post, neurological, surgeries like brain surgery or spinal cord surgery. They require a ketogenic diet pre and post, because the reduction of inflammation in the nervous system results in better outcomes. There's less complications in the surgeries. People heal and recover faster. That should tell us something. We've also known for almost 100 years that a ketogenic diet can absolutely put something like epilepsy into remission. So we know that this diet has enormous ramifications on brain function and brain health, and therefore it would make sense that it also rolls over, therefore, into mental health and wellness. And we're actually now seeing cases of people with bipolar disease on ketogenic diets, actually putting that into remission. We're seeing cases of schizophrenia being put into remission on a low-carb ketogenic diet. We're seeing cases of OCD, depression, anxiety, all being reversed and put into remission by changing the fuel source to the brain. And I mean, this might sound like controversial, but the truth is that there not only is there a science behind it that backs this as being very valid, but we also have the clinical data that shows that, I think for someone like you and I, Michael, it's like we kind of learned this the hard way. It's like we figured out that when I eat certain ways, I feel more joy, I feel more alive, I feel more vibrant in my life. And when I eat in other ways, I feel more depressed, I feel more anxiety. So, some of us have actually even had the experience of foods impacting our mental, emotional health. But, this is much more serious in the sense that using it as a treatment, it becomes a lifestyle. It's not a diet. We don't diet on a ketogenic diet to support our brain health. It's no, this is our lifestyle. This is how we live. This is how we eat. And when we do that, our brain can actually heal and it can function appropriately. And I think that's incredibly exciting, especially because up till now, we have not had good treatment protocols that work consistently for people. And, I have to just harken back to when you spoke of your brother and him not wanting to use the word bipolar and relate with that. And, again, we live in a world of labels. Like, you have this, you have schizophrenia, you have bipolar, you have Alzheimer's, you've got autoimmune condition, lupus, like whatever it is. But that is just that. It's labeling a symptom that's coming from a root cause. Health is not a destination. We don't just end up with heart disease. We don't just end up with dementia. We don't end up with cancer. We don't just end up with bipolar. Like, there is an underlying imbalance in the body that is resulting in a symptom that we call bipolar, because there's a collection of patterned symptoms that when we put it together, we call it this. And that's a big problem in our healthcare system today. Is, again, it's like, well, you have this, so we're going to treat those symptoms with these medications, as opposed to saying, you have an imbalance in your brain and in your body. We're going to look for the root cause of that imbalance, and then we're going to develop a game plan or a protocol to address those root causes. And then as a result of that, the symptoms start to resolve, as opposed to just trying to manage them for the rest of someone's life.
Right. So one fundamental thing blocking people is, it goes back to the whole Carol Dweck mindset thing, this fixed versus growth mindset, this genetics controlling us and our identity being what it is forever, versus this more environmental, epigenetic changes we can make, that we aren't stuck with what we are, and reality isn't this sort of fixed thing. I know you love reading a lot. You've been a big reader forever, and I can sort of feel some of these influential books that you've read. So one, I think there's that Mindset by Carol Dweck, but even bigger is this Brain Energy by Christopher Palmer, which clearly you've read. Anyone who wants to learn more about this, definitely Google his name. He's got a bunch of podcast interviews too. What are some other books that have been a big influence on you, or that you think people should read? I know people don't want to read sometimes. Maybe thinking of the audiobook or something. What are some of these are the must reads if you want to get better?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Like, Chris Palmer is at the cutting edge of this. Like, he put together the book Brain Energy that basically lays down the argument for the conversation that we're having right now, that is showing the research that's been done behind the metabolic association with mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, schizophrenia, for instance. Some of the other huge books along the way that probably influenced me, if I'm just trying to think of them off the spot, like some of these might be a little bit older. Maybe I can come up with some better stuff. But I know Dr. David Perlmutter is doing really great work. He wrote a book, Grain Brain, that talks about how certain foods, specifically grains, can impact brain function and mood. So I love his piece of the puzzle, his element. And his more recent one is called Drop Acid, which has to do with uric acid levels in the body and how that can damage health. And again, how carbohydrates actually, play a role in that. Long before that, Someone wrote a book, I don't remember the name, I think it was called Wheat Belly, that talked about how, again, grains, wheat, the impact that has on our gut function. Another person, a woman named Kelly Brogan, has written several great books that I think are essential. She wrote a book called A Mind of Your Own, I believe is what it was called. And, she was a psychiatrist practicing functional medicine. And again, her sole goal was helping people get off these medications by changing their lifestyle and, finding that, we could get better results through diet and lifestyle modification when it came to mental emotional health than we oftentimes could with pharmaceutical strategies. So, she's doing some incredibly great work, and I know she's evolved. She's doing some new stuff now, but that book was out quite some time ago. But it's a big one. It was one of the first that says, hey, what we're eating impacts our brain function. So there's just so many good ones. But yeah, I think Chris Palmer's new Brain Energy, it is a must read for anybody who's struggling with any kind of mental, emotional health. But the truth is that this metabolic dysfunction, this insulin resistance, is also at the root cause of almost everything else, including cardiovascular disease. So, dementia, Alzheimer's. So it's one of those approaches where it's like, you're going to get multiple birds with one stone. If you get this one area of your life under control or managed, it's not just going to help your mood. It's going to transform your brain function. It's going to transform your physical health. So I highly recommend that book at this point.
I'm kind of backtracking here a little bit. I wanted to finish up, but I had this one other question I wanted to ask about. You mentioned earlier how after, say, someone does a 28-day cleanse or they get super clean, whenever I, for example, feel really, really good, I feel too good, it's like I can't handle it, and I intentionally go to the other extreme, and I don't know, buy a bottle of whiskey or pound a pizza or something, and it's like I don't want to feel, or I can't handle that powerful feeling of being so clear and so happy, and I just want to throw it away. Part one is, why do people do that? And two, how can we stop ourselves, or should we even stop ourselves from kind of sabotaging ourselves in that way?
Yeah, speaking of books, I think I got another one that can help with that, but that's very common. I think we all do it to some degree subconsciously. It's like, we're not allowed to experience too much joy. It sounds crazy, but it's a fairly consistent phenomenon that, when people start feeling too good, they inevitably self-sabotage. Now, part of this, I think, has to do with addiction, and it's just kind of like, you could call it a relapse. Carbohydrates, for instance, if we were to just take that, we are addicted to these foods, and, we can get off them and go into what we might call recovery. It's like, I'm a recovered carbaholic, for instance, right? But eventually, part of recovery, is having to deal with relapse from time to time. And, yes, we know that is heavily rooted in our own dysfunctions, maybe you would say, within side of ourselves, of this need to feel unworthy, or this need to self-sabotage. Like we couldn't possibly allow so much joy and energy and vibrancy in our life. That would be bad. So it's almost like, to some degree, it feels more comfortable or even more safe for us to not feel good. It's like, it's better, we feel safe when we're small. When we get too big, it doesn't feel nearly as safe. So we make choices subconsciously to shut that all back down. It's like, that was too much love, I can't handle that. Of course, that's not something we consciously think, like, that was too much love, I need to make that go away. But, you can see that even in relationships. If you've got an intimate relationship with another, and, sometimes if you get a little too close, it's a little too vulnerable, a little bit too much intimacy, someone's going to throw a little bomb in there to blow it up and create distance. It's like, there's too much closeness. Now I'm going to say something or do something that is going to sabotage that, because I don't feel comfortable being that close. It was not safe for one reason or another. So I think there's a lot of inner work to be done. And I have these conversations with clients from time to time too. It's like, be prepared. Like, you're a human being. It's inevitable. Like, you will fall off the wagon. You will have some rough days. You will crash and burn from time to time. It happens to all of us. It's really a matter of getting back up and going. And, speaking of books, I believe Gay Hendricks wrote a great book on this called The Big Leap many years ago about, being able to expand our capacity for abundance and joy and love so that we can finally start breaking those self-sabotaging behaviors that we do, that when it just, we feel too good. I've got to make a choice to bring myself back down. Well, if we really want to grow, if we truly want to experience more love and more gratitude and more joy and more vibrancy in our life, we have to become aware of those patterns and allow ourselves to expand beyond it and feel a little bit more joy than what feels comfortable, and to be able to actually even sit in that discomfort. And from time to time, the discomfort, again, it's crazy to even hear it coming out of my mouth, but it's like, yeah, we can feel, discomfort from too much joy. I mean, again, it's all subconscious, just on our upbringing oftentimes. But so being aware of it. I don't even know that there's anything you have to do about it except be aware of it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I was feeling really good, and then I chose to eat some pizza. Now I feel horrible. Like, that's interesting. I wonder why I did that. Yeah, so just bringing that awareness back, I think, is that's really the next step. Awareness is the step in that case.
Yeah. And one other thing, I hear your story about, this car crash, and you were someone who cares deeply about health and your brain, and that was your job and your passion. And then you just got whacked in the head, basically, and you lost, at least temporarily, your favorite thing, sort of a deep, it's like the meaning of your life or something. And now you're full of energy and you're smiling and you're positive, but I guess this is more of a comment, like, wow, how are you so like resilient in that way? And maybe you're not. Maybe you did have this really, really dark time where you were depressed and sad and you just got past it, but we don't see that part. And was there a moment or what was it like in your darkest moment, and how did you get out of that dark moment and start to just take some action instead of just giving up?
Yeah, I mean, there absolutely. I mean, I have been through some really dark days and weeks and months, especially when I was dealing with chronic illness and the severe cognitive changes. And I would, to some degree, say that those experiences were some of the best things that happened to me, or for me, maybe you would say. The saying that things don't happen to you, they happen for you. The universe is always supporting us. It's always trying to help us grow and evolve. And I think I had to have those experiences for my own personal growth and for my own personal evolution. And, it's almost like it's forced me to do better. It's like I felt so bad, I had to make changes. And again, this might be the real blessing in a symptom, is that the symptom, if it's bad enough, it's going to force change. It's going to force you to start doing something different. And, that's what these experiences have done for me. It's like, would I be eating the way I eat today if I didn't have that experience? Would I be, doing the things that I do? Would I be, living the life that I live? I would not be the person I am today had I not had those experiences that forced me into doing something that maybe I wasn't ready to do, maybe I didn't want to do, but now I had to do it. And, I don't really know what you could say, like what moved me into action. I'm a very persistent person. And, I had fairly young kids. My car accident, they were like 4 and 6. When I was going through cognitive decline, they were probably, I don't know, gosh, maybe 12-ish, like somewhere in that range, like early teens. It's just like, I could not let myself go. It's like I had to be available in my mind. I was not going to miss that. And, quite frankly, Michael, my dad died. He was 47 years old when he died of cancer. I was 19 years old. And, so maybe there's some of that in there where it's like, I will not do that. I cannot do that. It is not time for me to go. I have to be available for them. And so it's like, I just found like that inner, desire. And it's like, and I can't live like this. I can't live in pain and depression and brain fog. I have to find a solution. So I think that my persistence is probably one of the qualities that has been able to get me through. And it's like, yeah, I feel the way I feel today because of the way I live today, but I live the way I live today because of how I felt in the past. And it was intolerable. I could not live like that. I had to find another way. But yeah, the reality is we all still have ups and downs. I'm still, once an addict, always an addict. I'm still a carbohydrate addict. It's like, we all can still potentially fall off the bandwagon and fall back into old patterns and ways, but it's really about recovery. It's like, we just keep getting up, we get back on the horse and we keep going.
Man, I could talk to you for hours, but I know you got a meeting with a client coming up. If people want to get in touch with you or they want to learn more about what you're doing or anything like that, where is the best place to go?
Well, you can find me in a few places at this point. So, I mean, website is always a good place to go. It's just drjonahyakel.com. So DR and then my first name, Jonah, last name Yakel, drjonahyakel.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're now on TikTok. And of course, I've got my own podcast, the Brain Health Podcast, that you can find on Apple and Spotify. So we're out there.
Well, I hope we could do this again sometime. And
absolutely,
I was so happy that we're able to, get to know each other like that. And wow, that was I gotta listen to that episode like 100 times myself, because that was a lot of information. Yeah. And if people go to your podcast, they'll learn even more and go to your website. But anyway, thank you again, Jonah. And
thanks so much for having me on. It was a blast. I look forward to doing it again sometime in the future. And hopefully that this is helpful. And again, hopefully we can just heal more brains.
You can check out the show notes for all the resources and cool things that we talked about today. In the meantime, make sure to take care of your body, take care of your mind, start believing that you can get better, rewind and re-listen to this episode or share it with a friend. And until next time, I love you and take care.